as military, state armed forces try to go about this process of training LOAC norms, LOAC principles and rules to their combatant memberships, to the soldiers on the ground, there's thoughts that it can be useful for state armed forces to report or to share their training practices. Of course, there are always issues regarding sensitivity in military training and so forth. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, what are some of the potential benefits for reporting this type of training to more broadly to the public or to international bodies? What are some of the potential downfalls or costs? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and not one I'd really thought about before, at least not much before this conversation. But it is what we do in San Remo, right? If you think of when I was teaching or was on the privileged to be on the staff there at San Remo, we bring lawyers, JAGs, legal advisors, or even just operators from countries around the world together to talk about a lot of these issues. And so what you see when you do things like that, whether it be in San Remo or at any other sort of collaborative get together, if you will, is information sharing, right? You're sharing best practices. And so just like you and I have talked about, hey, it's great to do the education, but you got to follow it up with, the on the ground sort of training. Those sorts of things, I think you can share good ideas because no one has a monopoly on good ideas. And so I think that sharing how you do it is helpful. And I think it also, I think it stands to reason that it would encourage reciprocal conduct, right? We want other countries, if we're doing LOAC training before we go into a mission, we want to make sure other countries are. And if we're in an alliance, if we're going into a mission with various countries as allies, then there might even be some requirements that, everyone's on the same page as far as the rules. So that's helpful. The one thing that I guess if there were a requirement to report all, LOAC training or how you do LOAC training, depends on how you word it, I suppose. I can sense that there might be some pushback from some countries, not wanting to share too much. And, maybe there's sort of this, hey, you have to report to us that you've done LOAC training and it's a check the box, right? And so it just becomes, hey, go give that briefing so we can check the box. And, that's not the intent behind this. It's about compliance. It's about protecting both combatants and civilians when we get into war. And so I think you want to make sure it doesn't become that, right? You want to make sure that that if we are reporting, there's of course the question of whether states are willing to be honest about what they do. And so I think you were sort of suggesting that maybe collaborative sharing of best practices would be helpful. And I'll tell you that in Italy, when I was in San Remo, very often, you'd have groups of people from different countries, far separated countries, talking about, hey, how do you address this when you teach law of the sea, or you teach this aspect of targeting, when you teach what a military objective is, how do you approach that? And so you see some sharing of lessons of, well, this has worked for me. Here's a PowerPoint that I used once. Don't ever use that. So you see this sharing of what works and what doesn't work. I don't know if that directly answers your question or not.
No, that's terrific. No, I think that's a great point. Is that it's done somewhat already on a military to military level through the San Remo process and some other processes that are somewhat. I think they're probably more focused on Western states, but also there's incorporation of non-Western states as well, and certainly would help to bring in more states as well to share best practice, as you mentioned.